Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Cal Pierce, Matt Bigley, and John Orr.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and failures encountered during our real-life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, invested students, to another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast.
Well, gentlemen, welcome back, and welcome back to you, listener. And we're excited that you are back here joining us for our sixth episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast. And we're excited to chat with you in this episode about one of our favorite ways of investing, and I think our kind of go-to strategy to build our own wealth. I think we all got started in this strategy. Last episode, if you would listen to the last series, actually, we had a 3-part episode on the Building Your Wealth Blueprint, where we outlined 5 strategies to get started in investing and how to kind of capture some more money around your home and how to think about your budgets, moving into how to get started with investing and what investments to look at, then kind of supercharging some of your investment, thinking about other people's money and different ways to kind of build that up over time. So in this episode, though, we're going to talk about our favorite and our go-to strategy, which is about real estate investing. Gentlemen, let's dive in, because there are 3. This is one of the things that you blew my mind with when we are investing and talking about real estate investing, because a lot of other investments, asset classes that we've mentioned on the podcast before, talk about, appreciation or growth. But, real estate has 3 ways to blow your investment out, or blow your wealth out of the water here. Let's talk about those 3 ways, guys. Let's get to it.
Awesome stuff. And yes, John, I mean, I vividly remember this moment. I was on a vacation, and you guys know I don't sit still for very long. So one day that I was sort of sitting on, it was by a pool in Florida, and I had this book about real estate. And actually, it isn't Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It isn't some of the other ones from our book list that you can find over on investedteacher.com/books. This was just some random book that I sort of picked up on at the airport, and it just caught my attention. It was about real estate investing. I started reading it, and I was blown away by this idea that you could buy property and actually potentially make some money. So I remember that as this first moment where I sort of went, huh. And at the time, this would have been probably just after I started teaching. And, so probably back in 2007 or so. And I let it go. I remember thinking about it and thinking, man, I need to get deeper into this. I need to look into this. And I just never did. The vacation, after that morning at the pool, I put the book down. I remember thinking about it, but then life went on. And then fast forward to about 2010. And I started digging down this rabbit hole again, and I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And this is where I started to change my thinking. And at the time, you know from previous episodes, I was paying down my mortgage, more aggressively than, say, the minimum payments. And I was just thinking, hey, if I could get this mortgage down to 0, it'd be like this extra mortgage payment going into my bank account every single month. And I thought that was pretty awesome at the time. And again, we're not advocating that you blow that money, but over time, I started to realize, wait a second, that debt equity in my house, I could take it. I could then get a property, borrow against this property, and potentially put money in my pocket. But I didn't realize that there were actually 3 different ways. A lot of people look at real estate and they think it's just going to go up in value.
Right.
And
that's what I thought.
You're going to make your money.
Buy my house or buy a house. All right, I'm going to get that house. And then all of a sudden it's like a stock. I'm just going to wait for it to rise in value. Yep. And then maybe I can sell it because the market increased, and now I can just sell it and take that equity.
Totally. I think that's what a lot of people sort of that's what attracts people to real estate. And they just think, it always goes up, which is not true, right? There are different dips in the markets, and all kinds of things can happen like that. But the bonus is the other hidden bullets, these silver bullets. Matt, what else? Like, appreciation's great. This idea, we will talk more about appreciation. We'll maybe talk about, what appreciations look like over the past couple of years in a lot of places, including here locally where we are in Windsor, Essex County, but also across many places around the world. But I would argue that that's that cherry on top. That should not be like the goal for buying real estate. What is one of the other pieces that we're really looking for when we're searching for a potential investment property?
Yeah, I loved your story, Kyle, about remembering, when you learn this and when you're this aha, because I mean, this is such an epiphany. This was, I'm not a math guy. You guys are number crunchers, hardcore math guys. So for me, it was like, this was one of those concepts that like, it took me a second to like really understand the power behind the numbers, but the concept was just so incredible, so awesome. So beyond appreciation, the second big one is mortgage pay down. So, I mean, this is this concept that, you're collecting rent and this rent is going to pay the mortgage off. You, of course, want to have more rent coming in than it's costing you, to have your mortgage, your insurance, and all those other expenses that we'll talk about in other episodes. But just this idea that someone else is paying the mortgage on a property you own, which conceivably means that one day you'll own this property outright and have never actually paid the mortgage yourself.
That is mortgage
just
pay down
exploded.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Because like mortgage pay down, you think like, okay, well, yeah, somebody's got to pay the mortgage here. Why not the renter? But I think why that's great with appreciation, because it's not the same as appreciation, right? Appreciation, the value of the home is going up because the market or the area is going up through no fault of anybody else. Like that's just happening in the background. Whereas you could either actively pay your mortgage down or not. And the renter is paying the mortgage. Therefore, you as the owner are gaining equity on that home every time, because all that, a big chunk, especially early in the days, of your mortgage payment is going to pay down the interest portion of your mortgage. But then a little bit, especially at the early days, and then a lot later on pays down the principal. And so then you are gaining that equity every time that principal gets paid. And so that's two different pieces, right? That's appreciation is going up because the markets are going up. That's because prices are going up. That's not the value that you own, the portion of your own home or the portion of this home that you own, that's going up. That value is going up because the mortgage is getting paid down by someone other than you.
And John, what I think is so cool is that this is going to really appeal to those people that are actually fearful of mortgages. Like I think what holds a lot of people back from getting an investment property is saying like we're all obsessed with paying our mortgages down. We've talked about this in past episodes. This is one of the things that prevents people from getting into investing at all. So the idea of taking on a second mortgage, like that's going to be incredibly stressful. So I think for those people, this should actually counterintuitively calm them down and maybe be something that we can help frame in this way, that someone else is paying your mortgage. Someone else is paying your mortgage. And again, over time, over the amortization of that mortgage, they are conceivably paying it off entirely for you. So I think that can't be emphasized enough, especially for those that might just be fearful of like, oh my God, I'm already stressed out about my own mortgage, or not stressed out about it, but I feel strongly about paying it down. What could be even better than paying it down? Someone else paying it down.
Right. I know. Right. I love it. Right. I love it. And when you put that, I think also it's like in your head, you have to get yourself in a position where, okay, if you're going to consider doing something like this, you want to make sure that you're putting yourself in a position where you feel good about it. So what I mean by that is, what I did back when I started with my first investment property is I actually I actually picked a property that I was able to essentially buy outright. Now, this was now going back all the way to 2011 when I purchased this property. In the US, there was a big dip in the housing market for a little bit because people were buying properties left, right, and center, all based on appreciation. So remember, we're saying we do not want to buy properties with the assumption that they're just going to like double in value over the next couple of years. That's not the goal. That's a bonus if and when that potentially happens. But back then, that was happening quite a bit. And they actually had such easy mortgage rules to get mortgages in the US that people could go in and basically say, I have a job, and they would give you a mortgage. Like, they didn't ask for any sort of qualifying documents or anything. You could put 0% down. Like, think about that for a second. If you could put nothing down, it's like you have absolutely no risk, at least up front. Your credit score is at risk, of course, if you default on that mortgage. But here in Canada, we had much more strict policies, and therefore we didn't experience the same downturn that the US experienced back in 2008, 2009, and in the years afterwards. So for me, what I wanted to do when I first got in, I wanted to put myself in a position where I essentially restructured my own home so that I actually did the opposite. Like you said, Matt, I basically went from this guy who wanted to go from like a 25-year mortgage down to like nothing really fast. That was my goal. And I did the opposite. I actually stretched it back out, what I owed, all the way like 25 years so that my payment went down. And I pulled money out so that I basically had 2 small mortgage payments so that I could feel comfortable with it. And it was like me just getting my toes wet. Like, I was like, all right, let's see, is this going to be okay? And I was like, I know that even if, and this is a fear that people have right away. And actually I was talking to Paul, Paul, I'm not going to say his last name just for privacy reasons, but John, you know, Paul, great math consultant from only a couple hours up the road. And he was sort of like mentioning this idea, like a fear he had is like, what if you can't rent the property? Well, I had that same fear. And I wanted to make sure that even if no one went and rented my other house, that I was going to be okay. Like, I wasn't going to lose my shirt. And I would recommend for anybody who's thinking about this, that you're kind of like, you know, you start thinking along these lines. Now, I later realized, and I realized how silly it is to think that there would be no one to rent my home, because the reality is everyone needs a place to live. And actually, there are more and more renters because the price of homes continues to rise, and it's actually becoming out of reach, especially for our younger generation. So this is obviously not a good thing. Like, I don't wish that on anyone, but that fact alone essentially guarantees that you'll be able to rent your property. Maybe you might have to adjust rent down a little bit if like maybe your projections were maybe a little bit too ambitious. But the reality is that you're going to have someone who's going to want to rent your home. We have never experienced a situation where, you know, we haven't been able to fill a unit within a couple of months, given a reasonable rent prices. Right.
And we calculate for that too, don't we, Kyle? We calculate for that. We include a vacancy calculation. Everything we do is incredibly conservative. We ensure a big safety of, margin of safety. And if it doesn't get rented out for a month, well, we've accounted for that in our calculations. I want to share that as well. So there's almost redundancy in the safety here, and so it's incredibly safe.
I'm glad you brought that up, Matt, because I was gonna add that as well if you didn't add that. But I think what's important is when we think about all these kind of like reasons why we shouldn't do it, that is a big one about saying like how what happens if I don't bring in my money? What happens if I don't bring in a renter? And I think what we want to make sure you take the mindset when you do enter into this investment in asset class and kind of take the real estate plunge, is you treat it like a business, right? Like you treat it like a business in the sense that you have to account for all these expenses. Like, what are those expenses that you're going to cover? Like, what are you going to make sure that your like you said, your vacancy rate is taken care of. Like, how much are you setting aside each month just in case? Like, what percentage should we be putting aside there? You're talking about, you know, making sure that the mortgage is covered. You're talking about making sure that the insurance is covered. Maybe you're setting aside kind of like a pot. I know you guys do this. You set aside a little bit of money every month from that renter's payment to kind of make sure that if something happens in the property, we can fix it and it's not a big deal. We've already accounted for all of these things. So thinking about as a business is important. And I think that helped me thinking about it as saying, like, look, there's money coming in. That's a revenue. We've got expenses. We got to account for those expenses and we budget for those expenses. So setting up a little budget for that. And I think we'll have a future episode about what are all the actual expenses that we need to go in? How do we calculate all these values? How do we analyze the deal? We're going to be probably going into that for sure. But I think what also, when we were thinking about that budget, you get this third benefit, and you have to plan for this third benefit. We've mentioned the two different benefits being the appreciation. We're hoping for appreciation. That's the cherry on the top. And then we've got our mortgage pay down, which are acting differently. But then the third benefit, this is where I think most asset classes do not have three benefits. This one has the third benefit, which is monthly cash flow. This is money in your pocket. This is your profit from your business. So your business has revenue, which is your rent. Your business has expenses, which are all those other things that take down that revenue. And then you've got money in your pocket, the profit from this business, which is called cash flow from your rental property. So that is the third benefit. Now, cash flow is great because that can help offset some of the the worries, you know, that could be putting towards any loan maybe you've incurred to buy that property. It like even just to get the down payment. It could be, hey, you know what? I'm going to put that in a reservoir over here just in case fund. Or it might be like, I'm going to use this monthly cash flow because I've already accounted for all the other expenses to put towards my car payment. Or I'm all of a sudden, you know, this is a pot of money you get now because of the work that you've done, the deal you've analyzed.
I love how you brought that up because, John, something that we've done, and in particular, Matt and I, when we began this journey together, and John, you've recently sort of jumped in this journey as well, is that cash flow. Deciding what you're going to do with that cash flow and how you handle it, I think, is really important. And for me, from day one, when I bought my first investment property, every dollar that didn't have to go back into the expenses or into the mortgage or into any of those things, anything that was left over, I would take that and I would have that money continue to do what I was doing before, which is paying down the money I owed on my own house. And I did it in a slightly different way though, because what I did, and I know, John, we had suggested that you maybe consider the same thing. We never tell people what to do. You know, you have to decide what's best for you. But basically, rather than rolling it straight into our home mortgage, we opened that home equity line of credit that we discussed in the blueprint episodes. And I had this home equity line of credit where I took the down payment and the closing costs for that first home. And I borrowed against that almost like for two reasons. One was like almost like an accounting piece where I wanted to see like what was part of the investment and what was like, what did I personally owe on my house? So I could kind of see those side by side. Another reason is it's actually beneficial from a tax perspective because here in Canada, those who are in the US, you can actually write off the interest on a mortgage on your primary residence, whereas here in Canada, we cannot. You can only write off the interest on investments, investment properties, not on your primary residence. So by splitting the two, I now have this sort of bucket over here where I go, okay, this I'm borrowing and I could write off the interest on my income taxes. And then when I take the cash flow, rather than that cash flow being income, it's actually just paying me back. It's like paying this loan off. And now I'm not having an actual like tax. I'm not going to have as much or as high of a tax hit on my personal income taxes. So I take this cash flow over here, I put it on the line of credit. And then the beauty is, and this is the part for me, it took a little while to feel safe doing this. But that line of credit, because I have more room on the line of credit, I know that if something goes wrong, so I'm paying down what I owe on the line of credit, but that can still be reborrowed if and when necessary. And for me, that's the safety net that I personally needed, is that I'm like, okay, I could take all this extra cash. I'm not going to use it to get a better car. I'm not going to use it to go on more vacations. Like, that is not what I wanted. I wanted to just start generating this wealth opportunity. So I take it, I pay off as much of that home equity line of credit as I can. It's slowly coming down. And if something goes wrong with the investment property, rather than me having all this money just sitting in a bank account doing nothing and just waiting for the furnace to go or the roof to need fixing or any of those things, I know that basically I'm going to save on interest over here, and I have the room to borrow if a big expense were to arise. So for me, that was like my safety net. I wanted to make sure that I could cover payments myself without having to give up like a massive amount of my lifestyle. So I wanted that. But then I also wanted the safety net of like, I wouldn't be in a jam. I wouldn't have to like, go to family or friends and say, hey, like I need some extra cash to get me through these next couple of months, because I know that I have this extra room here. So I guess sort of like a hidden message here is, don't max out your line of credit or all of the equity you have. Like, you want to be smart about it so that you still have that safety net just in case things don't go as planned, because life happens and it's impossible to predict exactly what will happen or how it's going to happen. And for me, knock on wood, has worked really well. There still have been surprises, but that safety net was there so that we could get through and ride through that and continue with this investment. Because again, the other bullet, those silver bullets, that appreciation and mortgage pay down, were taking over. They're still happening even when the furnace goes, right? So when that happens, I still have two other ways that I'm making money this month, even though it felt like I lost some money when I had to go and pay for that unexpected expense.
And Kyle, I think this is why it's so important for people to not buy an investment property without cash flow. I know it sounds crazy. Like, why would you buy an investment property that doesn't cash flow? We heard about this in a lot of bigger markets, places like all over the GTA, all over Toronto. People were banking solely on appreciation. And listen, I've run the numbers on appreciation. The past 9 years in Windsor, Essex County, the appreciation has been 12.4%. Now we calculated at 3%, right? We calculated at 3%, but cash flow is arguably, maybe I'll argue that this is the most important. Without that monthly cash flow, you're gonna be a sinking ship quick. Right. One of the things I love about investment properties compared to buying your own home is that there's no emotion for me in an investment property. I mean, probably excitement, but it's really about the fundamentals. We run down our checklist. Are there separate utilities? Are the rents at market or the vacancy unit? We'll talk about this in future episodes. Have the major systems of the house been upgraded or updated? But it's an unemotional experience. And so we make sure that these properties cash flow. And a lot of times selling agents don't actually include all of the things we're suggesting we include in our figures, because they want to beef up those numbers, right? And so when we go through it, I just had this conversation with a listing agent the other day. I said, hey, you didn't include any vacancy in here. You didn't include management costs in here. You didn't include maintenance in here as well. So I said, this property actually doesn't cash flow, and we had a good discussion about it. So I know they're just doing their job, but my point is, do not buy a property that doesn't cash flow. That's the quickest way to get yourself into a terrible, terrible situation.
Now, I'm going to add like sort of like a bit of just a slight detail for people to think about, because there is a case, and I still think your rule of thumb here, Matt,
like competing.
No, not at all.
Theories right now.
But
let the debates begin.
Yeah, what I want people to think about though is oftentimes what happens is when you're not cash flowing, what is happening is typically the mortgage payment is too high, right? Like that's really the thing that's out of whack typically, right? So basically you won't want to pull out as much equity in the home, or you don't want to borrow as much as you can against that home. But you might be somebody sitting there, maybe you're listening, maybe you're in a profession that pays pretty well. Let's say you're in the medical, field, you're a doctor, or you're someone who has like a decent chunk of money there. You can make a property that might seem like it's not cash flowing. You can make it cash flow by putting more down, right? Now, is that to us, we want to maximize every dollar we put into a property, but you might
we talked about leverage before, this idea of leverage. You want to put the least amount down so you can leverage the bank's money to the extent possible.
Absolutely. So in that case, though, if you're a person that's going, well, I have enough over here and I just want to get a cash flowing asset, and I'm not going to get as much advantage of, let's say, that mortgage pay down or whatever. That's still something you can do. And again, it still aligns with what Matt's saying, because you do want it to cash flow. You don't want to walk into a deal where you already are in the red, which means basically you're like, I'm going to take this chunk of money, I'm going to put it down, I'm going to buy this property, and then I'm basically committing some of my hard-earned money that I'm going to work for every single month to put into this property, assuming everything else goes perfectly. So it's almost like you're almost guaranteeing that you're going to be worse off than you're even projecting. And in the end, sure, now maybe you have appreciation, which bonus, that's great. Maybe you have some principal pay down, but the problem is that you've been putting in your own cash, and that's just more and more of your own hard-earned money going towards an asset that maybe, had you held up or had you waited or had you found a better deal, you could have maximized that opportunity and minimized the chances that you're going to have to put money out of your pocket each month. So that's an awesome point there, Matt. And it's something that we just don't do. We just walk away from those deals, or we negotiate. And if we can't get it to be cash flowing, if we can't be creative enough to do that, it's just not a deal for us, because we are unwilling to take that chance. However, there's other people out there that are willing to take on that risk, and sometimes it works out, but oftentimes it just simply doesn't.
Sounds like you guys are very cautious in this, and it being a good thing, especially for first time investors, first time real estate investors, and trying to get into this. Matt, you had mentioned something that I wanted to comment on or ask you a little bit more about. You said, like, you make sure that there is no emotion, and I think if I'm a beginner, if I'm getting my feet wet, if I want to like dabble into trying something here, like what are you guys like what are the steps you want to tell our listener about when something that feels emotional will happen? Like, for example, you own a property, Christmas Eve, the water tank breaks and it leaks all the way down the floor, and all of a sudden somebody's getting a call at midnight on Christmas Eve to come fix this thing. As a homeowner, or as a rental property owner, how did you guys not get emotional in a scenario kind of like that?
I think, John, it's really about having a good team in place. And I think one of our future episodes is going to be talking about real estate investing as a team sport. Like, I love partnerships, I love teams. And so in a case like that, like clearly a stressful situation for that tenant, and something we would never wish upon any tenant, especially on Christmas Eve, but at no time at all. The great thing about that is that, our experience has taught us to have a system in place to cover ourselves off so that we're not worried about emergencies like that, stressful situations like that. So in that case, it was our property management company that, that got the call, that responded and that dealt with it. Actually, I don't think we found out about it until the next day. Which is amazing, because that was the first time we've ever had that happen. That's the proverbial scary landlord story,
right?
That like Christmas Eve, a water heater bursts, like you can't be at home with your family because you're, there with a mop and a bucket, like horror stories. This is the thing that makes people run for the hills. And so it's really about having that system in place. We're big believers in our management partners, and we'll talk about that in the future. We self-managed for our first, 4.5 years, Kyle. So we brought management on relatively recently, but that was about us taking another step away, making this even more passive than it was already.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something that is really important that we did do was that first, 4 or 5 years where we were trying to gain a better understanding of like, what does the system look like, which meant sometimes some scenarios that, we probably would have preferred to not have been involved in. However, now that we've had that experience, we have an understanding of how that works and our systems are set up so that we aren't really involved in that. And to be honest, because we've been so cautious and I suppose like conservative in our projections, when we see something like that happen, we just sort of go, darn, that sucks.
Right.
But we got it. Like we got this covered. Like it's not going to be something that we're going to emotionally,
Exactly.
run away from. And, something else too, and this is where I thought you were going to go with this, John, was about the emotion is like, oftentimes too, when you're buying your own home that you're going to live in, that you want for your family and, you want to come home to every day, it's a completely different situation when it comes to a rental property because you're not the one that's going to be living there. Now, we want to make sure it's safe, clean, and affordable. That's something that we believe in. But at the end of the day, it's like the color isn't my choice, right? Like, and the way the house is designed is not my, like, none of those things are a factor. It's how safe, clean, and affordable is this property going to be? And is it going to offer us an opportunity so that we aren't put in a position where we feel like, hey, if something goes wrong, that we're feeling stress, anxiety, or, any sort of remorse. And that's something that we simply do not want. We want this to be something that we feel excited for, that we know is going to have some ups and downs to it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as long as you're planning for it, I think at the end of the day, you're going to feel great about having done the work because at the end, the payoff is so big.
And at the end of the day, Kyle, this is about getting wealthy over time. So these blips are going to happen. These challenges are going to happen. Real estate investing is not a get rich quick strategy. Certainly there's the Instagram influencers out there with the crazy cars and the blingy watches, but
guys
this
on
is
treadmills,
guys on treadmills. This is truly about getting wealthy over time. I remember some conversations I had with my dad early on in our real estate investing journey. And my dad was someone who flipped houses and did that. To me, flips are too stressful, too cash intensive, too risky. That's for me personally. And I said, Dad, invest with me in rentals. He said, oh, I'm too old to see the benefits of that. And, we've now built a multi-million-dollar portfolio over the past, 6.5 years. And of course, we had no idea what would come. But I just, this is about the long-term journey to building that wealth. You're not going to be rich next month or even next year, but this is truly building something big and powerful.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. And I'm glad you answered that question because I think there's lots of questions I think still lingering about how to get started. And I think just kind of thinking about what, when these kind of things happen, people don't want to have to deal with them. That scares a lot of people off. And I think you guys have answered that by saying like, we have built that into our business, right? Like you're running it as a business. You've got these scenarios that can happen. You plan for these. You've got property managers built into the deal and built into your expenses, and it's still generating cash flow. So why don't we kind of pivot away from some of the theory and look at an example here so that people can kind of see hard numbers on what this might look like for return on investment, and thinking about that. So let's say we are we found a property. We're just going to stay with easy numbers, and then percentage wise, they can scale from there. But just to keep things nice and easy, let's say we were shopping around and we analyzed deals. And also to say that let's say we analyzed like 50 deals before we found one that was good, right? Like we analyze deals. That's how we get better at picking the right deal, is by analyzing as many as we can, like setting a goal. Like I'm going to analyze 3 deals this week, or I'm going to analyze a deal this week just to get good at it. And let's say we found a deal that we like, and let's say that the purchase price of this house is we're going with easy numbers, is $100,000.
Great realtor. He really negotiated. Like great realtor.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I love it. Listen, but I remember it was not that long ago, at least here in Windsor, Essex County, where like $100,000 per door was like, expensive, and now we've gone through this COVID bubble and all the, asset prices have gone up and things are, so definitely a harder thing to find. But I will say my first rental property, when I bought that property in Florida, it was $95,000. And, I look at that and go, had I known what I know now, and I ran the numbers and I was conservative with the numbers, I'm like, wow, I should have backed up the truck and bought as many of those as I possibly
That's a
could.
truism of real estate, though. Everyone in the moment, I say this to my clients every single day, you're always going to feel like you paid too much in the moment. A few years down the road, you're going to be bragging about what a real estate genius you were, So when we look back, we're like, I was a genius. And at the moment, we're like, oh my God, I overpaid. So that is a truism.
Absolutely. Except you remember what I was saying throughout this, last couple of years, the COVID thing where, people were pent up, and then all of a sudden it was like, it seemed like at least everywhere here in Ontario, and I know it happened in a lot of places, where all of these houses were going to bidding wars. And I remember, me and Matt talking about this specifically, but John, you and I had these conversations as well, because you wanted to get in on another property. And, I remember saying this, and it was like, we had to remind ourselves of it. And I said, listen, if there's like 10 bids on this property, there's 10 bids on this property and you win the property. I said, how do you feel? And a lot of people would say they feel great. They won it. And I'm like, well, to me, I feel like I was the biggest sucker. Because if I got that, if I was the 10th bidder on that property, especially for an investment property, right? When it's a primary residence, it's different. Like I got to say, it's like, if that's the house that you really
dream
want,
houses are
absolutely.
That,
I'm
right?
like, hey, you do
Forever
you.
houses.
And that might be a massive win. But when it came to rental properties, investment properties, I kept saying, I'm like, so what that means is that we thought out of these 10 other or 9 other investors that this property was worth this amount, and none of them thought it was worth that amount. And essentially what it meant at the time was that nobody else thought it was worth the same amount as it did to us. Now, on the other hand, now that things are calming down, and I'm sure a lot of people are seeing that happen, we're not seeing the bidding wars anymore. And we're actually seeing a lot of people are like kind of going into hiding. It's almost like they're like now too scared to get in on a property. And this is the time where we look and we go, okay, we see this property. Let's say, John, your example of $100,000 property is there. And we're like, let's have a look at it. I'm immediately thinking, I go, okay, well, I want to put, hopefully, depending on your situation, but hopefully you're able to put only 20% down. It's an investment property. If you're looking to buy a primary residence, typically like 5% down here in Ontario is something you can do if it's your first home. But for a rental, you're going to be looking at 20% down or more, depending on your situation. So I'm like, for this $100,000 property, I'm like, I got to put 20,000 out of my pocket. I've got some closing costs. Like, let's say, I'm going to go kind of a little bit, I'm going to push this number up a little higher than it probably would be. But let's say it ends up being 25,000 out the door that I have.
Deposit and closing costs. 25.
Yeah. 25,000 total. And so that's like what I've got to come up with. So that's like my home equity line of credit, or maybe I have like this savings nest egg that I've just been accumulating and I didn't know what to do with it. This could be what you use that for. Now I've got this $80,000 mortgage. And immediately what I want to know is that if over 25 years at a current interest rate, like as of this recording, probably 5.69 to 6% here in Ontario is kind of like around where we're at right now, a little higher, much higher than it was just a year ago. I look at how much that will be, and I go, okay, my mortgage payment's around $500, and I go, how much rent can I pull in? And if that property can sustain that mortgage payment, as well as my property tax, my insurance, if I'm paying the utilities, we always want the tenant to be paying utilities if and when possible. And basically any like little bit, like we usually keep that 10% for your vacancy and your maintenance and all of those things. Like you want to make sure all of those things are all factored in. So with this particular property, if let's say you could pull in $900 of rent, and you've got a $500 mortgage, that leaves you with $400 to take care of your property tax, of your insurance, right? Property insurance. You have to make sure that, you know, in case of a fire or any other type of emergency, that it's covered, and any of these other expenses. So if, let's say that's around $300, you have $200 left in your pocket. This is only an example, right? Like if you can find me this deal right now, I will show up with an inspector tomorrow and check it out with you. But ultimately it's like, wow, I have taken care of all of those expenses. I have that principal is getting paid down, right? So that's that hidden bonus that you're getting there. We have the appreciation that hopefully is going to continue working for us as well. And I have a couple $100 of money in my pocket. I could take that $200 each month and put it onto my home equity line of credit or whatever I need to do with it to just make sure that I have that extra money sitting around just in case something doesn't happen. And ultimately, I want you to think about this for a second. The growth on this property between those three silver bullets we talked about, our cash flow, our appreciation, and the mortgage pay down. When we look at the benefit of that over time, and you realize that it's not being divided by $100,000 when you try to figure out your rate of return, that you're actually only dividing it by the $25,000 that you had to pay, what we realize is the power of leverage, just like Matt has been talking about. He mentioned it earlier in this episode, and you mentioned it in some of the Blueprint episodes. You're looking at a massive, awesome return on your investment. So if we were to look at like 3% annual appreciation on $100,000, that's like $3,000, right? We're making an assumption that it's 3%. Maybe it's 0 next year. Who knows? Maybe it's 12% like it was over these past few years, as Matt had mentioned. We don't know what that is, but if we assume 3%, which is sort of our number that we typically use regardless of the market, that's a $3,000 increase in the value of the property. If we look at the cash flow on that property, we're looking at about, what if we said around $200 a month, that's going to be, well, what would that be? That would be $2,400. Yeah, $2,400.
Showing off. He's showing off.
So now you're looking at over $5,000 of profit. Now, if I look at $5,000 of profit and I only put $25,000 out of my pocket, holy smokes, that is 1/5. That is 20% return on my money, which to me is mind blowing. And that's with us. Again, we want to make sure that we're using conservative numbers here. Like, we don't want to be looking at best case scenario when we're running these numbers. You want to look at conservative returns. And you want to make sure that it doesn't have to be a 20% return. Maybe your numbers show a 12% return. That might be like, that's great too. As long as you're not lying to yourself. That's the one thing that you want to make sure, is that you're not lying to yourself. If the numbers are ridiculously high, then you might want to start asking yourself, like, what neighborhood is this property in? Like, am I happy with that neighborhood? Is the rent higher, but the actual like neighborhood isn't as safe, or isn't like, you know, as welcoming to families, or whatever that might be? All of those other factors go into it as well. And sometimes you might want to sacrifice some of that return for maybe a property that is a little more expensive, because you like that particular neighbor or neighborhood for whatever that reason may be. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the benefit here is that you're getting 3 ways to earn, and you're earning on only a fraction of the total value of the property, which to us is just such a win-win-win.
Yeah, that's a big return for sure. And I think we've set up a, you know, by setting up a system in place and having a team, you can make this feel like it's not as risky as you might think it is, or time consuming as you might think it is, or as tedious and management, you know, as you think it is. It's a little bit easier than when probably what you imagined. Now I do want to bring up one more kind of benefit here that sometimes happens, not all the times happen, but I know that you guys have talked to me about this kind of benefit after a certain amount of time because of the property appreciating. Let's say you own, and this is the goal of like always wanting, I think if you want to hold this property for a very long time. Then what happens after, let's say here in Canada, you get to set your term for your mortgage, and let's say 5 years is up. And if you look at your home, you might pause there for a second and go, hey, look, my rental property has increased in value. It's appreciated, right? We're not saying it always appreciates, but maybe it did. Maybe it appreciated and valued over those 5 years. And your mortgage is up for renewal. And it might be a situation where you want to go back and use more leverage, right? So I'm going to go back to the bank and go, hey, bank, my home, this rental property I have is increased in value. I'd like to renegotiate the mortgage, but I want to renegotiate the whole value of the home, the current value of the home. And what will happen, guys? Like what happens at that point? The bank's going to go, okay, wait, your house appreciated, let's say in 10% of the value. All of a sudden now it's worth $110,000. They're going to say, okay, we're going to give you $110,000 on this property, or up to a certain percentage of it, and you get to bring that money back into your like equity. And also what's happened, right? The renter has paid down the mortgage over that time. You've built up your equity. It's appreciated in value. And all of a sudden you've just unlocked more equity in this home. And sometimes it's possible that the amount that the bank is going to give you back in cash outweighs how much you put down on that house to begin with. And all of a sudden you got all your money back, and now you own the home for free.
There's almost too many bombs in this episode. That's John, like a free, now we're talking a free house. You've taken all your money out of a property. Like, again, I'm not a math teacher, but that sounds like an infinite return for me, right?
Yeah. Like, you have $0 of your own in this house because it went up in value, and you can renegotiate that mortgage, and you take that cash and start a new mortgage, but you now have that equity that you get to just pay back yourself, your loan that you may have used, or pay back your $25,000. So now you're sitting pretty with your $25,000 in pocket to go buy another home with that $25,000 and maybe a little bit more, and you keep this rolling.
And that's exactly what Kyle and I have done a number of times. Like, all of our seed money, all of our initial investment, again, borrowed from our HELOCs, we were able to take out with a refi. And, we'll talk about refis more. We wanted to make sure we refied at a number where we could still continue to cash flow, because of course, when you refinance, your mortgage goes, up, in some cases substantially. We were able to take out our entire investment, which is just so mind blowing and crazy. It's actually hard to even comprehend that we own properties without actually having any of our own money in them.
Amazing.
And this will happen over different periods of time. And those who are on YouTube right now, I just want to show, like, if you're not subscribed to Invested Teacher on YouTube, definitely make sure you do. But if you see on the screen, I've got this 100,000, and let's say it's 3% it's appreciating in each year. If I was to just, after 1 year, that means the house would be worth 103,000, not a ton of money to get back out. But then we go to the next year. Now it's like 106,000 and change, because remember, we're compounding on the previous year. And if I just keep dragging this down, by year 5, we're looking at 115,000, 116,000. Remember, that initial investment was, do you guys remember how much we said we had put in of our own money into that?
25,000.
So this property is now worth more than half, it's increased in value by more than half the amount that we actually put in. And that's just appreciation. So we're not accounting for the cash flow
and the mortgage.
We're not accounting for the mortgage pay down. So at year 5, it's possible that I might be able to go to the bank and say, hey, now give me 80% of that amount. Like, so if I go over here and say, like, take this amount, give me 80% of that, they're going to give me like 93,000. And if that mortgage has been paid down by a good chunk of change, I might be close to like the maybe $20,000 mark, and almost have all my money out. And that's at that 3% appreciation rate. So if you keep going, by year 10, you're looking at 134,000. You are now going to be like well in the clear of having your money out, still owning the property, still getting mortgage pay down, still getting appreciation into the future. Now, again, we're using that 3%. There's no guarantees here. In some years, you're going to be, lucky, like maybe the last couple of years where people saw double-digit appreciation. And in other years, maybe you might have, maybe even like a decrease. We've been lucky enough to not have that happen to us yet, but it doesn't mean it can't happen in the future. But the one thing I do know is that my investment is safe in this physical asset, which is going to continue generating that cash flow. Remember, Matt said positive cash flow, right? So that positive cash flow is going to be helping, and my principal is going to be paid down. So if that appreciation is not working out for me in this year or the next year, the reality is those two other pieces are going to be picking up the pieces for me. And that appreciation will be coming back, because real estate is always going to be one of those really scarce resources and assets. And therefore, over the long run, you will stand to benefit for sure.
Awesome stuff there, Kyle. And I think that's a great place for us to tie this up with a bow. And we hope in this episode, you got those 3 silver bullets of real estate investing: property value increase with appreciation, the mortgage pay down from the renters, and then also the cash flow, which is our profit from our business. So 3 ways to build your wealth with real estate investing. And if you would like to learn more, you can head on over to investedteacher.com. We have some reading there. We have our blueprint. If you have not got that already, you can click our Get Our Blueprint button right on the website. We also have a few links there if you are interested in taking the next step. If you want to take the next step in that investing, you can reach out to us and learn a little bit more on what you could do on that next step.
John, I said that investing is supposed to be emotionless, but I'm all excited here. I'm all worked up because this topic is really, really exciting. This is just like rocket fuel for your wealth. So I'm all stirred up here. Listen, we want you to leave us a 5-star rating and review. We'd love those reviews, and we appreciate those ratings so much. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Investing is better together. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on all of our social media platforms. We're at Invested Teacher, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, Matt, I get so excited before we're going to record these episodes. I'm excited now, and I hope that you listening are excited listening at home. So make sure you share this with your friends, family, colleagues. Any support is helpful. And guess what? We've been on some of the top 100 charts for business podcasts, and we want to keep that going, and we can't do it without you. So that 5-star rating and review is so important for us. And if you don't know how to do that, then guess what? Just flip it to someone so that they know that this podcast does exist. For all links to resources, transcripts, and all of our other goodies to help you get going with your invested teacher journey, head on over to investedteacher.com/episode 6. That is investedteacher.com/episode 6.
And again, if you are looking for that next step, or how to get invested, or what's your first moves here, head on over to investedteacher.com/blueprint, and you can download our PDF blueprint to how you can get started. Again, that's investedteacher.com/blueprint. All right, invested students, class dismissed.
Just a quick reminder, there is no investment advice. This is for entertainment purposes only. The content is for you to get some information here, and you should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice.